ladies and gentlemen, my name is Owen and welcome to this brand new video here on Blurb Osh. In this video, guys, we're going to be talking about the worst and best car that I've had, well, since I passed my test, really. Starting with the worst car that I've had. And believe it or not, the worst car is not the car you think it might be. So let's start with the worst car that I have ever owned. The first car being a 2010 Citroen DS3 in yellow. I couldn't make a video on this car at all when we had this car. I think it was in 2021, maybe 22 that we got this car. It was a 1.6 THP Sport Racing Edition in yellow stroke white, and it was supposed to have black stripes on it. Well, it did, kind of. It was supposed to have black decals on there. It was supposed to look basically the black and yellow stroke white of what Jeremy Clarkson used in one of the specials that they did with hot hatches. The car we had for just shy of a month. It was fantastic for the first 2 weeks, that was, until it started having overheating issues, misfire issues, wheel bearing issues, and then turbo issues, as well as numerous other things that was going wrong with that car. Now, we sent the car back and got our money back literally just shy of a month into having the car. It was just a problem child ever since that 2 weeks was up. And to be fair to the car, it really wouldn't be the worst car that I've ever had if it wasn't for the fact it was just constantly breaking down, constantly having issues. Even with the 2 weeks that we had it where it was working, it was still having a few issues with electricals and so that sort of typical French shite, really. Anyway, we sent that car back after having it for just shy of a month. I was going to make an entire video on it, but it's completely pointless considering I didn't make any content with it anyway. The second car, which is also technically one of the worst cars I bought, wasn't actually down to the car's fault, really. It was down to my stupidity thinking it'd be something I would have for a long period of time, and that was my 2006 1.6 naturally aspirated petrol Vauxhall Zafira. Now, I say this is probably the second car, it's not the worst, and the reason why it's not the worst is because the car actually never faltered me. It was just more so I bought that car as my first car. I hate to say it, a 7-seater Zafira, especially a 1.6. Anyway, the car was great. It had no issues with it whatsoever other than being obviously slow. But I used to work in a tile centre at the time, so using it as a car stroke van was quite admirable at the time. And then obviously I was working in college, which meant that I needed, obviously because I was doing media studies, I needed to pull people around, should we say. So the car had its purpose at the time, but it was a car that really didn't suit me. I like big cars, yes, but that car, yeah, it didn't suit the bill. So that car has to be the second car that I've disliked, or was one of the worst cars. And I lost a lot of money on that car. I think I lost a good 500 quid of that car, which to me at the time was a lot of money. Even now, 500 quid is not to be sniffed at. The third worst car I've ever bought, I hate to say this because it's a car I still currently possess, at the moment on my list is the Vectra B. My 1998 Vauxhall Vectra B in green. I'd put it that easily because there's a bit of a confusion between the two colours, and that's velvet green and jungle green. But anyways, it's green. That was probably my worst decision for buying a car. It seemed quite admirable at the time, but when I paid $680 for it, it had no service history with it whatsoever, but there was an old lady that owned it since 2005, and it was a really well kept car. However, not in this video, but probably in the next couple of videos, you guys are going to see why this car is third on my list. There's quite a few things wrong with it. We know that already from when I got the car, but it's transpiring into something a little bit further off than just a few things wrong with it. And again, I will cover that in the next couple of videos and what have you. But I bought that car at the worst possible time I could have bought a project car, and that was because I found out literally probably a month or so later that I had the option of getting a house, and well, I could have done with the extra money, to be quite honest with you, and also the less of a headache. But I suppose it makes good content for you guys watching me fix a rusty pilot. Fourth on my list has to be the red Astra J. Again, I never really made a video into the reason why we got rid of that car, but I did point a few hints into why we got rid of that car in one of the videos that I posted quite a few months back. Basically, an altercation happened between me and who was supposed to be a friend of mine at the time, a really good friend at that, where the car was attacked and I allegedly run him over in the car, which I didn't. He jumped onto the car and claimed I did run him over, and this was during the time when I was just battling my alopecia that I had. And yeah, basically the police were involved. I had to get a solicitor involved, a lot of support from friends at the time, and altercations like that or issues like that, you tend to realise who your real friends tend to be, which was quite upsetting for me. It was upsetting for my partner at the time. And subsequently we had to get rid of that car, and we got rid of the car not out of guilty conscience before anybody says. We got rid of the car because of a few things: bad memories, the dent that was in the bonnet and numerous dents around the car, considering when we got it, it was immaculate. And I still maintain to this day, if that issue or that thing never happened, that car was just in pristine condition for what it was, and we were the second owners of that car, so it was really well kept. So ultimately we had to get rid of that car because of the bad memories of it and the fact it really wasn't really good on fuel for what we needed at the time. So we tended to just get rid of the car and get something else, which you guys already know is the Citroen DS4. Okay, so fifth on my list is actually my Vauxhall Vectra C. Now this car had a story of its own, and the fact that it's a little bit higher up than the red Astra I will explain in just a second. So this car I still to this day have a lot of love for, and the fact that it is still on the road driving around, considering the issues I had with it when I got rid of it, absolutely amazes the hell out of me. So this was a Vauxhall Vectra C 1.8 VVT, probably one of the worst engines that you can have in a car. The Americans hated it, we hated it, and they were just so unreliable or so underpowered and so fuel consuming. 20 miles to the gallon was a constant thing in that car. And that was even on motorway runs, believe it or not. 32 max, I think, is what I tried to get out of it, and I was driving it like a granddad. But that car I actually loved. It was, I would class that more so as my first car. It was my second car, but I would class it as my first car because I met so many people with that car, and I did so many stupid things in that car that it holds a special place in my heart. Even though it's a Vectra C, and it's a Vectra C, and it's still a Vectra C, it still holds a place in my heart because I loved that car, and I had it for a year and a half until the first gearbox went, where the bearings dropped. Anyway, we put a new gearbox in it, forgot a seal on one of, well, I say if we forgot a seal, it was sent with a missing seal on the unit. So when we installed it and we ran it, it killed that gearbox, and then we put another gearbox in which had a lot of metal shavings at the bottom, and it was out of a high mileage 1.6 Astra, which did make the car pretty nippy from then onwards, until I started hearing a lot of clicky noises. Thinking on it now, it was probably CV joints, but at the time I thought it was gearbox related, so I decided to ultimately get rid of it. And I was going to get rid of it for a GTC, which this garage sold half an hour before I arrived to pick it up, and I ended up going for the Astra J that I had, which you guys may remember. But the Vectra would be one of the cars that holds a special place in my heart, and that's why it is number 5 on the list of cars that I've owned, because, well, actually, it it was terrible. It was a terrible car. Following it closely at number 6 is actually the Astra H, which, although it wasn't my car, it's my partner's car, that was at the time. It was a car that I practically drove while she was learning, so I'll count that on the list.
Anyway,
the Astra H was a 1.4 chain-driven engine, probably one of the most underrated engines, but also one of the most louder engines you can buy in the car, because it was chain-driven, and of course the chains will always sound like absolute dog. But the car was fantastic on fuel, absolutely ridiculously slow when you're pulling off, let's say at a junction, but once you're up to speed, it's actually quite a respectable little car. It always has a soft place in my heart for a decent Astra H, and that was a decent Astra H. The interior is immaculate, the exterior wasn't too bad, although it was tastefully altered by the previous owner in relation to the plastic dipped wheels and the plastic dipped front grille and the plastic dipped rear emblem, and a few minor changes on the interior. But otherwise it was a really nice car, and it looked quite nice. It drove quite nice, to be fair, and then it had an issue with one of its EGR things or whatever it was that was on it at the time, and we ended up leaving it alone. We just drove it, enjoyed the car, and then we decided to upgrade, and we paid £1,000 for that car at the time, and it didn't really need much other than it needed a new drive shaft, it needed a new fan regulator, and I tried to sort of quiet down the noise, which I knew was a chain anyways, but we couldn't afford to change the chain at the time. It wasn't terrible, but it was there, it was noticeable. But otherwise, had new brakes, had new tyres on it, and it looked really good, and it drove really well. But we got rid of that car because, one, we needed air conditioning, because that car, well, the air conditioning pump seized on it, but also because it was really slow. 7th on my list was probably, is probably, the Corsa stroke DE, which is actually the Corsa E, and I think about it more so now. I made a comment on it saying it was a Corsa D stroke E because they are the same, they look the same, yeah. But anyways, Corsa E was actually a courtesy car of mine, so I didn't have that car very long, and it was actually not a bad car. It still had the same 1.4 engine in it. It was quite nippy for what it was, and I suppose, as they say, when you have a rental car, you drive it like it's stolen, and I didn't. I had a few issues with it where I'd had a nail go through the tyre the first day that I owned the car or borrowed it, but otherwise it was a really nice car, good on fuel, comfortable, probably too comfortable to the point where it went uncomfortable after a couple of hours of driving it, but otherwise it was not a bad little car. And would I have one? The fact it had the audacity of calling itself a sport and it leaned that much, I probably wouldn't have that particular model, but it wasn't a bad car. It had a heated windscreen, which at the time cars were freezing up. With a click of the button, it's literally defrosted within seconds rather than minutes, which is quite handy if you want to get to work if you're late, which of course I was. The 8th car on my list, believe it or not, you guys are going to hate me for saying this, is actually my 1998 Corsa B. So the Corsa B was bought as a project car. I bought it pretty much on the back of a Ford Tipper, and it was about to go to the scrapyard, except I saved it. Well, I say I saved it. A friend saved it for me to then buy off him weeks after him taking it off the tipper. And I kept the car. It's actually it still is now, the longest car I've ever owned was that Corsa. And I had it for that long a period of time, that most of the time it was sat in a garage being worked on all the time, until I unintentionally blew the engine up from a failed spark plug, and then the car sat and sat and sat. I then had my little boy. I didn't have the time to do anything with it, but I thought it was a good idea to buy a Vectra B at the time, and then I decided to cut ties with it and let it go. So I sold it for 250 quid scrap to a friend of mine who I know, and he actually fixed it, MOT'd it, and sold it. And even to this day, at the recording of this, I know I made a brief video of it a month or two ago, but the car is still running even today. It's still going, and we're yet to make a video on how that car is doing, i.e. meeting the car with the new owner for the first time in months. And that brings me on to the final two cars which I have had. No, there is another contender here. So the last three cars that are on my list is the DS4, the Insignia Grand Sport, and the Astra J SRI that I had. So what's going to make it better than fuming at this point is the next car is actually the DS4. The DS4, as I explained, was swapped. No, it wasn't swapped. We swapped the red Astra J for the DS4. Fantastic little car. I say little, it looks like it's on stilts because it's quite high up. It's a crossover, so it kind of looks like a Duke in a sense. 1.6 HDI engine, which is Peugeot, bulletproof, really good on fuel, really comfortable. Isn't without its problems cosmetically, but otherwise, and some other bits as well. Like at the minute, it's making some squeaking noises, but it's just passed an MOT, and it drives really well, so I can't really fault the car. But that is also that's going to be third on the list because it has needed a lot of work done to it when we got the car. It kept going back and two. Not the car's fault, but it was the garage's fault for not doing the work that we asked them to do when we originally agreed to get the car. So it's been constantly back and two. We've had numerous courtesy cars because of it, and that's why it makes it third on the list. So now that brings, guys, two cars left, the Insignia B and the Astra J SRI. Which one is going to be second best? Which one's going to be the best? This may again surprise you, but the Insignia B is actually second on the list. Now you're probably sat there saying, why is the Insignia B second on the list? It's a car that you've done so many miles with, more miles than what you did in the Astra J. It saved you so much on fuel, it's quick, and it's newer. So why is it second on the list? Guys, the Insignia B has not been without its problems with me. The battery keeps dying in the key. The spare key is dead as well, and I'm not rating the car on the spare key, but if you guys remember a while back, the chain and guides went on the engine early on to when I had the car. It was 8 months after I bought it. It had to go back to have its engine redone, basically. It had to be engine and gearbox out to fit a new chain onto it, which took an agonising 9 weeks during COVID to do, which I know with most cars, if they had that sort of issue, it'd be the same because of parts availability, but it become an absolute headache because that's when I had the Corsa DE. Then it had to have numerous recalls, all for the same thing, which is for the brakes. So it has an electronic module for the brakes, and that had to get constantly updated. So we had that done. Then my clutch went, which is kind of my fault, but I would have thought with a dual mass clutch it would have not broken at 68,000 miles, but it did, which I was warned of on the forums when I was getting the car, that they eat clutches. So it had a new clutch and flywheel, which again wasn't without its problems, because when I got the car back it went into limp mode and the turbo wasn't working. So I took it back to the garage, they sorted that, and now the car has been running perfectly fine. Currently it's on 87,000 miles, I'd like to say. I've completely forgotten. It's come up with a service light, and it's not, I say a service light, a service message, except this service message isn't to say that the car needs a service, because it's not due one yet, and the display says it's not due one yet. It's actually to do with the car's found a fault, which I've yet to determine what that is. So that makes the Insignia second place. I absolutely love the car. It drives amazing. I wouldn't drive it so many thousand miles if I didn't like the car. I love driving it. It's my pride and joy, and every time I clean it, as I did in the last video, it really scrubs up well. So that brings on to the Astra J SRI, which was my third car in actual fact that I ever owned. So why have I chosen the Astra J 1.6 SRI 14 plate one as my favourite car? That car was bought not on purpose. So I was actually after an Astra J GTC at the time, which, as I explained a couple of minutes ago, was sold half an hour before I was able to get there to get it. So the guy in the garage, when I was selling the Vectra for it, basically shown me this Astra J that was sat in the corner. 14 plate, it had 30-something thousand miles on it, very low mileage for what it was. I again was the second owner of that car, actually. Technically third if you include the garage that I was buying it from, because they applied to be the second owner. So technically I was the third keeper or second owner. I sold that car just at roughly around 71,000 miles, so I still ended up doing a fair bit of mileage in that car. Granted, it wasn't the best on fuel, but it never gave me any problems, bar when I bought it. It needed a new battery, whatever. It needed tyres after a couple of months of owning it, whatever. It needed new brake pads, whatever. All serviceable parts. The Insignias had that, and a brake caliper because it was seized. Yeah, but that only cost me 40 quid, so I'm not going to really be arsed with that. And it needed a new flexi pipe because that was a bit tired, which again cost me 8 quid, so I'm not going to bother about that either. All serviceable bits I had done all at the same time, but for the 3 years that I had that car, I put I had a back box delete on it with a nice chrome tip at the back, which did make the car sound quite nice. The only problem with it was it wasn't the quickest car, but with that VVT, it wasn't too bad. Although it was slower, and if he's watching this, he's going to laugh at this, it was slower than a 1.6 S-regged Tigra. Although they are lighter, so I can kind of get away with that.
Anyway!
But the Astra J never gave me any problems. Every MOT it had, and these were all legit MOTs as well, they weren't dodgies in any way, shape or form, although if you do a reg check on the car, you'd probably think it has had some, but no, because I had the springs done on it. I constantly looked after the car. That was another thing that I caught on one of my videos, which was a pre-MOT inspection that they did on it. Was it needed a spring on the back, so that cost me 100 quid to get the pair done. But the car never faltered. What I'm trying to say is it never gave me an advisory, it never failed an MOT, it never had any realistic reliability issues with it other than ones I decided to get done or do whenever I noticed them. It wasn't the greatest on fuel, but it obviously wasn't the worst, because I could get 46 to the gallon or I could get 36 to the gallon, which on a petrol NA car it wasn't that bad at all. So that's why the Astra J SRI is first on my list, because it's the most reliable car that I've had, one that gave me a comfortable living basically, and it was a car that I could jump in and I knew always it will get me to work and nothing would go wrong with it. It was quite a good car, it was comfortable, it was sporty, it wasn't the quickest, but cornering wise it held like glue, which my Insignia doesn't. The Astra J SRI is the best car that I have had in terms of reliability, fun, and expenditure. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and it's going to be a short video to you, but to me it's 30 minutes long. A short video to you on what cars I've owned and which one I rank as being the worst, which of course is the Citroen DS3, and which one's the best, which is the complete opposite, an Astra J 1.6 NA SRI. You tell me, what is the best car that you've had and what is the worst car you've had in the comment section below. I'll be interested to see what cars you consider the worst that you've had and which car you consider the best. Let me know in the comment section below, guys. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching this video. Leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.